Welcome friends. Today's our topic of discussion is poetic feet and meter. Poetic feet and meter is an element of poetry that makes us able to analyze a poem, and this analysis is not just a rudimentary technical analysis, but it is an analysis that makes us to understand how a meaning could be understood through the poetic feet. It is one of the important component of poetry that attributes poetry a certain kind of a rhyme, rhythm, music. At the same time, the knowledge of poetic feet and meter makes easy for the reader of a poetry to understand the poetry in its real sense of the term. Whenever one reads a poem possessing a knowledge of poetic feet and meter, it somewhere enhances one's understanding of poetry and particularly appreciation of a poetry. Whenever one tries to appreciate a poem without knowledge of poetic feet and meter, it is somewhere incomplete, way of appreciating a poem. One who possesses knowledge of poetic feet and meter, and with that knowledge, if somebody tries to analyze a poem given on the page, the text of the poem, with the knowledge of poetic feet and meter, then it somewhere makes that person able to understand better than one who does not possess knowledge of poetic feet and meter. And knowledge of poetic feet and meter somewhere is necessary in order to do a good appreciation of a given poem. It somewhere makes easier for explanator or the reader to understand the meaning impregnant over there in the lines of poem which are written in a poetic language. And the most important aspect of poetic language or verse is that it follows certain poetic feet and meter. So, in order to understand what is poetic feet and meter, let us see what it is. When we analyze a poem, you may be asked to determine poetic feet and meter or rhythmic structure of the poem. What role a rhythmic structure of the poem plays in an appreciation or understanding of a poem is that it can say somewhere prepares your mind to understand what is the meaning that goes beyond the literal meaning of the words which have been put into particular association. This is can say somewhere that poetic feet and meter somewhere uh, make easier for the person to understand that what kind of a poem it may be, or what kind of a emotions, feelings, experiences are being expressed through a poem. The term fit refers to pattern of traced and untraced syllable in a line of a poetry, and meter refers to the configuration of a poetic feet within a line. Here is a simple difference that has been highlighted between what is poetic feet and what is poetic meter. Poetic feet means a pattern of traced and untraced syllable in the line of poetry, whereas meter refers to the configuration of poetic feet within a line. It means meter is greater term than feet. When 2-3 feet come together in particular association, in particular order, in a line of a poem, it becomes meter. It means the, can say, the laser, unit is poetic feet, that forms the meter. Poetic feet comprises of traced and untraced syllables in a particular, can say, order, in particular association. When two or more than two poetic, feet are presented in a particular order, in particular association, that forms a particular meter. With a little practice, you can learn to identify feet and meter in any poem. It is very much easy to uh, learn to identify feet and meter, but it requires certain practice. With a little practice, one can become well versed into identifying feet and meter in a given poem. Let us see what are the poetic feet are there. The first is a single poetic foot that contains a certain number of traced and untraced syllable. Common forms of poetic feet include iambic. Iambic poetic feet comprises of untraced syllable followed by traced syllable. Here are certain words which have been pronounced over there, particularly be long. Here B is untraced syllable while long is traced syllable. In the word destroy, D is untraced syllable, stroy is traced syllable. Similarly, in word portray, pour is untraced syllable, tray is traced syllable. The next feet, poetic feet is trochaic. It is exactly opposite to iambic poetic feet. In iambic poetic feet, untraced was syllable was being, can say, or is being found followed by traced syllable. Here in trochaic, traced syllable is followed by untraced syllable. Exactly opposite to what iambic is. In iambic pattern, untraced is followed by traced. In trochaic poetic feet, traced is followed by untraced. Garden. Gar is a traced syllable. Done is untraced. Market. Market. Here we can feel the trace is on the first syllable, not on the second. Toothbrush. Even in this world, we find can say feel that where the trace is being given, that is on the first syllable of the word, as it is a diasyllabic word, toothbrush. Next syllable is poetic feet is anapistic. Anapistic is somewhere that also goes near to iambic. In iambic poetic feet, untraced is followed by traced. Here, untraced followed by trace. The trisyllabic poetic feet. This trisyllabic poetic feet is similar to diasyllabic iambic, whereas untraced is followed by trace. In a anapistic, untraced is followed by untraced, means the repetition of untraced is there for one time, and then traced syllable is being uh, used over there. Here is Disregard. Here is word disregard. It is trisyllabic word. Dis, re, and guard. Dis, re are both untraced syllables, while guard is traced syllable. Same is the case with the word overcome. O, ar, come. O, ar are untraced syllable and come is traced syllable. Understand. Understand. These are the three syllables which are found in this word. It is a trisyllabic word. Un, dar, and stand. Un and dar are untraced syllables and stand is traced syllable. The next one is dactylic. Next figure of poetic feet is dactylic. It is exactly opposite to anapistic. Traced syllable is followed by two untraced syllables. It is also trisyllabic poetic feet. Dactyl is also trisyllabic poetic feet in which one traced syllable is followed by two untraced syllables. For example, buttermilk. Buttermilk. But is traced syllable. Termilk. These both are untraced syllables. In the same way, elephant. Elephant. L is traced syllable. Elephant. These two are untraced syllables which are followed over there. Handkerchief. Handkerchief. Hand is traced syllable. Kerchief. These are two untraced syllables which follow hand, this traced syllable. The next point is poetic meter. We have already seen that poetic meter is greater than poetic feet. Several poetic feet or two or more than two poetic feet come together to form a poetic meter. A poetic meter refers to a number of times a poetic foot appears in a line of a poetry. It means that meter is something that counts the can say occurrence the occurrence of a poetic feat, that how many times it has occurred. The common form of meter include monometer. Monometer contains only one poetic foot, in which only one poetic foot is used. Due to its short length, you rarely encounter this kind of a meter. This is the rare can say meter that is being used in a poetic language in a verse. Diameter means a meter that contains two poetic feet. Here is an example of an iambic diameter from the first line of a poem, We Are Seven by William Wordsworth. A simple child. There are two words, simple and child, in which the can say iambic diameter is used. Simple, child. These can say two can say feet words are used. Trace followed by untraced. Trimeter is the another meter. It contains three poetic feet. Here is an example of trochaic trimeter from Percy to a skylark. Higher still, higher. Higher still, higher. we have already seen that in a trochaic meter, the traced is followed by untraced. Here, these are the words wherein trochaic trimeter is used. It means repetition of trochaic foot for 3 times. Higher, still, and higher. Here, the repetition of trochaic foot for 3 times. And that is why it is being called as trochaic trimeter. Means trochaic feet are used 3 times. From the earth thou bringest. From the earth thou bringest. Here is also we find that traced syllable is followed by untraced, and this is how even in this line there is the can say usage of trochaic meter for 3 times, and that is why it is called as trimeter. When the uh, particular foot is used for 3 times, that is called as trimeter. And here trochaic foot is used for 3 times recurrently, and it can say occurrence is being counted, and the occurrence is for 3 times, and that is why it is called as trimeters. As trochaic can say feet is repeated for 3 times, that is why it becomes trochaic trimeter. Next poetic meter is tetrameter. The word tetra itself shows that it must be containing 4 can say poetic feet. Tetra means 4, meter means the combination of poetic feet. So it is clear that in tetrameter there must be the can say repetition of or the occurrence of a particular poetic feat for 4 times. And here is an example of anapistic tetrameter, and we have already seen that 2 untraced syllable followed by traced syllable is a poetic field that is named as anapistic. And here the repetition of anapistic meter for 4 times, anapistic poetic feet for 4 times, so it forms a poetic meter called as anapistic tetrameter. For example, the Azarian came down like a wolf on the fold. Azarian, the Azarian here is 2 untraced syllable followed by traced syllable, and this is how this can say comes into association for 4 times. So this is how when anapistic uh, poetic feat is being repeated for 4 times, it becomes anapistic tetrameter. The next example of anapistic tetrameter is, and his cohorts were gleaming in a purple and gold. Here also we find that there is a 4 time repetition of anapistic foot. Anapistic foot means 2 untraced syllables followed by traced syllable. And here we find that repetition is over there of untraced syllables, 2 untraced syllable followed by traced syllable, and this is how it forms anapistic foot, and the repetition of anapistic foot for 4 times over there in this line, and that is why the line has been written in a anapistic tetrameter. It can be remarked or it can be analyzed. So here we find that anapistic tetrameter has been repeated for 4 times, and an anapistic feat is repeated for 4 times, and that is why it forms anapistic tetrameter. So the simple thing is that whenever we read meter, we need to read uh, first what is the poetic foot that has been used, whether it is iambic, whether it is trochaic, whether it is anapistic, or whether it is um, other you can say poetic feet, uh, like a dactyl, anapistic, trochaic, and iambic. These are the four basic can say poetic feet. First is trochaic, iambic, untraced followed by trace. Second is trochaic, trace followed by untraced. Third is anapistic, untraced followed by untraced followed by traced. And fourth is dactyl, traced is followed by two untraced syllables. So in the same way we find that there is the another can say meter that is called as pentameter. The name itself indicates that it contains five poetic feats, means there is a repetition of a particular poetic feat for five times, and that is why it becomes pentameter. As the poetic feat is repeated for five times, that is why it becomes pentameter. Here is an example of iambic pentameter from The Walking by Theodor Roethke. Iambic pentameter, as we already know, that untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable. When iambic feat is repeated, we know that in iambic feat, untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable. Whenever it is over there, it forms a kind of a poetic feat called as iambic. Here is the example: wake to sleep and take my walk and walking slow. Here the words which have been in a bold type, they are traced can say syllables, and the words which are not in a bold can say type, they are untraced syllables. Here we find that untraced syllable followed by traced syllable for five times, uh, and that is why it becomes iambic pentameter. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. Even in this line of a poem, we find that there is a use of iambic pentameter, iambic foot for five times, and that is why it forms iambic pentameter. I feel my fate in what I cannot fear. When we see the this analysis of the above given line, we find that it begins with untraced syllable followed by traced syllable, and this can say occurrence of untraced syllable followed by traced syllable comes for five times. And as we know that a poetic foot in which untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable, that forms iambic foot, and that is why when iambic foot is repeated for five times, it becomes iambic pentameter. And this particular line is in iambic pentameter. The next example of iambic pentameter is I learn by going where I have to go. When we look at the analysis given of this line in a poetic feat and poetic feats association or the occurrence, we find that iambic pentameter is used repeatedly for five times continuously, and that is why it becomes iambic pentameter. that can say repetition of foot becomes iambic pentameter. Here in this line we find that there are 5 foot which have been used, and all of them are iambic uh, foot, and that is why they are being called as iambic pentameter. Next poetic meter is hexameter. The name itself indicates that this meter contains 6 poetic feet, and here is an example of dactylic hexameter. As we have already seen in the analysis of poetic feet, that dactylic means a poetic foot in which there are three syllables are found in a particular association, that is stress followed by two unstressed syllables. One stressed syllable is being followed by two unstressed syllables. And here in hexameter there is an example of dactylic hexameter. It means one stressed syllable followed by unstressed syllable, two unstressed syllable. This combination is being repeated for 6 times. That is why it becomes dactylic hexameter. Dactylic foot is repeated for 6 times, and that is why it becomes dactylic hexameter. The first line of the poem Evangeline by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. This is the forest primeval, the murmuring pines and the hemlock. Here we find the analysis of the line in poetic feet, and we find that there is a particular poetic feet that is called as dactylic, that is in which one trace syllable is followed by two untrace syllables, that is used. That particular foot is used over here for 6 times, and as dactylic foot is used for 6 times, it is being named as dactylic hexameter. Next poetic foot is heptameter. The name itself indicates that it must be combination of 7 can say poetic feet, means a particular poetic feet might be repeated for 7 times. Here is an example of iambic heptameter, means iambic foot must be repeated for 6 times in a continuous association. When it is so, it forms iambic heptameter. Here is the example: sang of gold and leaves of gold and their grief. Here in iambic foot we find that untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable. Here is the example: I sang of leaves of gold and leaves and of gold and there. 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 times there is a repetition of iambic foot, and that is why it becomes iambic heptameter. Similarly, in the second example, of a wine I sang, a wine there came, and in the branches blew. Here is untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable. This repetition, this can say combination is repeated for 7 times, and that is why it becomes iambic heptameter, because in iambic foot untraced syllable is followed by traced syllable. The last one in a poetic meter is octameter. The name of this poetic meter itself indicates that it is a meter that must be containing 8 poetic feet. Means a particular poetic feet might be repeated for consequent 7 times. Repeatedly, that repetition might be over there. And here is an example of trochaic octameter. And we know that trochaic is a poetic foot in which stressed syllable is followed by unstressed syllable. Here is a line, the first line from Edgar Allan Poe's famous poem, The Raven, in which he has used trochaic octameter, means he has used combination of stressed syllable followed by unstressed syllable for 8 times. And that is why it became a trochaic octameter. Here is analysis of the above given line. Here we find that stressed syllable followed by unstressed syllable. This kind of a repetition is there for 8 times. And this combination somewhere forms a trochaic octameter, because trochaic foot is used for 8 times over here repeatedly, and that is why it becomes trochaic uh, octameter. Dear friends, this is what is from me about poetic feet and meter. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned.